Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now, what we're looking at this time of year is traditions at Christmas. So many of our traditions actually stem from the medieval times, and believe it or not, from before then. So we're going to have a look at decorating the Christmas tree, singing carols, having those wonderful Christmas dinners, those feasts with friends. They all have their roots firmly in the medieval times. So I've made a model, as you can see, to help me explain some of the traditions of those days that help shape our Christmas holidays of today. It's interesting, isn't it? This wonderful, magical time of Christmas. It's actually the winter solstice, 22nd, 23rd of December. In some calendars, it's actually the 25th. It's when the sun sets on the shortest day of the year. Now the days are going to be longer. The nights are going to be shorter. They regarded it as a time of renewal of life, because a new year is coming. New crops can be planted. People in the old days, getting through that dark winter, they were looking forward to a new year. Literally, that rebirth of life. The first recorded Christmas or Christ's Mass was 1038. And this whole time, anyway, is known as the Yuletide, the time of Yule, where you have the Yule log. So back in the medieval times, Christmas was 12 days, the 12 days of Christmas. On the first day of Christmas, my true love said to me. But in the medieval times, the 12 days were celebrated. You had some of the saints' days, St. Nicholas's Day and St. Stephen's Day. You would go to church, you would listen to Mass, and you would celebrate for those 12 days of Christmas. And to help them keep track of the days, they had the Yule log, which burnt for 12 days. Now, I've actually put it in my model here, this Yule log. You've got my servant there who's not very happy because he's got to feed the log into the fire. Now, I wondered, how do you know the log is going to burn for 12 days? Well, you don't just let it burn for 12 days. You let it burn for day one. And you measure how much it's burnt down. And then you can gauge that you will make sure that on the last day, you've got enough wood left to burn for that last day. Now, of course, nowadays, we don't have enormous fireplaces. Well, most of us don't. And we can't afford to have a Yule log burning away. But we do, in fact, have a tradition of a Yule log, especially in Britain. I've seen them in the US and also in Canada. We, of course, have the Yule log cake. It's a chocolate roll covered in chocolate and made to look like a log. Well, the tradition we have today of the Yule cake, the Yule log, comes all that time, way back in history, in the medieval times and beyond. O Tannenbaum, or should I say, O Christmas tree, I love a good Christmas tree. But I always believed that the reason the British, for instance, had the Christmas tree was it was Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, brought it over from Germany to Britain, and it caught on. Charles Dickens actually mentions the Christmas tree. Of course, the Germans had to have got their tradition of the Christmas tree from somewhere else. And some of the traditions are quite lovely. Cut down a tree, hammer it into the middle of the market square, decorate it with apples. A place where people can gather, they can sing, they can simply just be together. That's what I love about Christmas time, is being together. But when the 12 days of Christmas were done, the tree was dug up or pulled up and burned, and the ashes then were spread on the fields. Another of my favourites at Christmas time, at this time of Yuletide, is carol singing. I'm not the best carol singer, I will own up to that. But my favourite, without a doubt, carol is Stille Nacht, Silent Night. My time in Germany, I just loved those carols. But as a kid in Birmingham and then later on in Lichfield, my little towns, I would go around carol singing with groups of kids, and people were just too happy to give us a few pennies to get rid of us because we sounded awful. But it was always light-hearted. And you can trace this all the way back to the medieval times, even beyond wassailing, they called it. When groups of folks would go round with a communal bowl of warm cider or ale with spices in it, they would sing to you at your door, and you would take a drink of the wassail. And then in return to these folks entertaining you, offering you the wassail, you would actually give them a little bit of food and drink. However, if you failed to ante up with that reward of food and drink, there would be mischief. Now, of course, Christmas Day is dominated by not present giving or presents receiving, it's Christmas dinner. Now, when I was a kid in my house, Christmas dinner was a big affair. We would have a turkey and a joint of roast pork. And I could never understand, because my mum was always, you will have so much turkey and then so much roast pork and apple sauce and things like this. And I didn't realise that my mum was paying homage to the ancient times, the medieval times, when you had roast pork, whether it be on a spit or the boar's head, which would be stuffed with the beautiful fruits and meats. The boar's head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary. It's amazing to think that my mum, without realising the tradition of roast pork on Christmas Day, goes all the way back to those medieval times. But can you imagine being in the Great Hall, right? There's people dancing, getting ready. The cooks, I've got a spit boy over there actually turning the spit for the roasted boar. How busy it would be. But the feast itself, yes, there will be roasted suckling pigs. There would be the boar's head, possibly hunted a few days before by the master of the house. This was a big deal. But they would have showpieces, like, for instance, a peacock. So they've gone out into the gardens, they've got a peacock. But they don't, because I used to do my head in. I used to see these things, there's a swan. The royals could have a swan. How do you do that? Do you take the feathers out first? 1, 2, 3. Can you imagine that? They skin the bird, cook it, salt the inside of the skin, scrape it and salt it. And when the bird is cooked, they make sure there's a nice piece of wire up the neck. They put the whole thing back together. You could have 2 peacocks. Or if you're royal, you could have those beautiful swans. They look as if they're alive. You can eat them, but the meat will not be the best. It's more for show. What they really want is a piece of that boar's head or a meat pie. I've got one here. I have an English pork pie, one of my favourites. In fact, when we finish shooting this film, I'm going to eat that slice. I can eat the pastry, and the jelly inside, the meat, delicious. But in the medieval times, apparently, the pastry was more of a preservative. These pies were baked for so long in the oven, the pastry was hard. I've also read when I was working at Warwick Castle that there were sometimes cupboards full of these pies, and they would be sealed so nobody could eat them. And then come the day before the great feast, they would open it and they scrape off all of the mould. That's great, isn't it? But once they're on the table, you crack open the pastry, chuck it away if it's inedible, and you eat that succulent meat inside. But interestingly, the pies today are round. In the medieval times, they were rectangular. And when they made the base deep in the tin there, that was called a coffin. Fascinating, eh? Where we get the word coffin. From the outer casing of a meat pie. When you die and you're in your coffin, you are the filling. It's great, isn't it? Yeah? But actually, there was just other things to eat as well. You could have frumenti, which was a porridge, oatmeal, but it had dates or dried fruits in it and honey. It was a sweet dish from the medieval times. But I've got here some mince tarts. I love mince tarts, but I prefer mince pies. Quick explanation. A tart doesn't have a lid. A pie has a lid. But in the medieval times, it wasn't just the minced fruit. It actually had meat in it. And they got to be cooked right. Otherwise, food poisoning. The last thing you need, Christmas Day, is a bad stomach. But we're talking about the Great Hall. Yeah, now the master of the house, he might invite some of his best tenants up to the Great Hall to join in with the feasting. But they must bring their own cutlery, their own cups, and their own firewood. Firewood was expensive. Even if the clergy were invited in, a couple of priests or monks, they would have to bring their own stuff too. But going down through the people, the poorer you got, of course, the less you have. But this was the time of giving and ensuring that people had some meat, something to drink on Christmas Day. On the estates, everybody could celebrate Christmas. Even the poorest of the poor were taken care of on Christmas Day. A little bit of extra drink, a little bit of extra meat. And it's the same today. People still, to this day, with their Christian, or is it their pagan heart, still give, take care of those who have less, have little. Now, at Christmas time, we all like to be entertained, have some fun, have a laugh with the family. Well, back in the medieval times, they were just the same. And in the Great Hall, especially at the end of the medieval times, you would have a man in charge of the entertainment. He was called the Lord of Misrule. In Scotland, the Abbot of Unreason. He would actually take care who's dancing, who's playing the music. He would get up to mischief as well, but his main task is to ensure that the whole thing went smooth and they had fun. They liked to dance. They liked to listen to the music. I've got a jester here, doing his acrobats and doing all these jokes and that kind of thing. So, but they liked to play games. That blind man's buff was a favourite in those days. But they had board games. Nine Man's Morris. They would play checkers, dice. But in the poorer houses, they might not have a jester or somebody who's playing all of the instruments. They might have somebody who just can play the flute. But interestingly, they would still play their games, blind man's buff and their board games. But can you imagine in some of those cottages in that dark winter solstice time, gathered round the fire, you've had your feast, you've sung your songs, now it's quiet. Grandfather starts to tell stories of things gone past, maybe a dark tale, maybe a ghost story. Because it was believed at the time of winter solstice, the veil between life and death was at its thinnest, and it's at this time that the dead could pass through and walk amongst the living. Now, you can't have Christmas without mentioning Father Christmas, St. Nick, Santa Claus. Nowadays, the image, of course, is with his red coat. I think that comes from Coca-Cola, but I've seen pictures of him in Germany with a blue coat. Well, in fact, the image of Father Christmas with the beard, the big coat, actually goes back to the Green Man. Now, the Green Man is actually a pagan character, covered in leaves. He had a deep green coat. He was there as a symbol of man's need to reconnect with nature. There are other meanings about the Green Man, but it's wholesome. He is warm. He is happy. Father Christmas, as we know him, truly does have his roots in our distant past. Now, something we do today was begun way back in the medieval times. The practice of giving gifts. The noble lord there on his estate would reward his best workers with a gift, a Christmas box. It may be extra food, it may be some little treasure. Think about work nowadays, your Christmas bonus, your Christmas box. That goes all the way back to the medieval times. People would exchange gifts, but the hanging of a stocking on the mantelpiece. Now that stems from one of the legends of St. Nicholas. There's no written evidence of the stockings hanging, but the story goes that St. Nick had been staying with a poor family and heard that the father was planning to sell his 3 daughters to save them all from starvation. Knowing that the old man wouldn't accept charity, Late one night, he drops in 3 gold coins, or was it 3 bags of gold, into the girls' stockings that were hanging over the fireplace to dry. The next morning, Christmas morning, when they found the gold, they were overjoyed and knew they wouldn't have to worry anymore. So the tradition of the stocking, we can trace that back to that lovely story. When I was younger, you would always have a sock with nuts, an apple, or maybe even a satsuma in it. I used to empty it back into the fruit bowl, but it's actually symbolic. It's reminding us of the gift that St. Nicholas gave all those centuries ago to those girls. I love it. But can you imagine today with these great big stockings or boot socks that you can buy to hang on the mantelpiece? No longer is it an apple and some nuts. It's there for gifts. Give me this. I want that. Can you imagine if we suddenly got rid of all of that and we gave the children a sock with nuts and an apple in it? You can't have Christmas without religion, though, can you? It is a Christian festival, after all. It is a celebration of the birth of Christ, our Saviour. But if you go back into the medieval times, it played a major part. You went to Mass. Now, I've been to midnight Mass in a cathedral, would you believe? And it was mind-blowing. It's one of those things, one of those lovely things, if you're a Christian fellow, midnight Mass. It's quite special. But in the medieval times, the church, they didn't just hold Mass. They would have had plays, reenactments of the 3 wise men. They actually put on a crib with straw just for people to see, and then the story of the birth of Christ will be told. And these plays, these recreations of the Nativity, we still have them today. So many of the schools in the Christian world, every Christmas, will put on the Nativity. I, all those years ago, was a shepherd with a tea towel on me head. My son was the innkeeper at his school, and my wife, I am certain, she would have been that little angel. So even our modern schools with their nativity, they are rooted in our medieval past. Before I go, I'd just like to wish you a Merry Christmas. Well, that's English. How about a little bit of Welsh? Land of my fathers. Nadolig Llawen. From Germany, where I used to live. Frau Weihnacht. To my French friends, joyeux Noël. To the Spanish friends I have, Feliz Navidad. Then the Scandinavian countries, where a lot of the pagan traditions of the medieval times actually come from. Merry Christmas in Scandinavian. Go Yule. Merry Christmas. Well, I hope you enjoyed that Christmas video of ours. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description. Now, before I go, I'd like to give a quick shout out to some of our Patreon members. We have Jeffrey Cormier, Daniel Ziegler and Matthew Sullivan. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.